The gunshot that shattered the saloon window wasn't what made Helena Crawford drop to her knees in the dusty street of Jerome, Arizona, but rather the words her own father had just spoken. "You're not worth the trouble of keeping, girl, and you sure as hell aren't worth fighting for." It was August 1883, and the copper mining town sat perched on Mingus Mountain like a precarious dream, buildings stacked against the hillside in defiance of gravity and good sense. Helena had lived all 22 years of her life in this place, watching it grow from a rough mining camp into something resembling civilization, though the resemblance was still pretty thin. The afternoon sun beat down mercilessly, and she could feel the grit of the street beneath her palms as she steadied herself, the weight of her father's rejection settling into her bones like the Arizona heat. She had asked him for help, just once. The Kincaid brothers had been threatening her for weeks, ever since she'd refused to sell them the small piece of land her mother had left her before dying of consumption 2 years back. It wasn't much, just a quarter-acre with a tiny cabin on the eastern edge of town, but it was hers. The Kincaids wanted it because it sat right in the path of where they planned to expand their smelting operation, and they weren't the kind of men who took no for an answer. "Please," she had begged her father in front of the Silver King saloon, where he spent most of his waking hours. "They're going to come for me tonight. They said so." Thomas Crawford had looked at his daughter with bleary eyes and something that might have been regret if he'd had the capacity for such feelings anymore. "I got nothing left to give you, Helena. Your mother took the best of me when she went, and you've been nothing but a burden since. You're not worth fighting for. Hell, you're not worth the whiskey I'd need to work up the courage." That's when the gunshot had rung out, some dispute inside the saloon, and Helena had sunk to her knees, not from fear of the bullet, but from the complete dissolution of the last hope she'd been clinging to. She didn't know that Brennan O'Sullivan was watching from across the street, one boot propped against the wall of the general store, his weathered hat pulled low against the sun. He was new to Jerome, had only arrived 3 days prior with his horse, his saddle, and a past he didn't care to discuss. At 27, he'd seen enough of the world to know injustice when he witnessed it, and he'd heard enough of Thomas Crawford's declaration to understand what was happening. Brennan had been a cowboy down in the grasslands near Tucson, working cattle drives and breaking horses, until a drought had dried up the ranch where he'd spent 5 years of his life. He'd drifted north, hearing that the mining towns needed men who could handle themselves, men who could guard payroll shipments or wrangle the mules that carried ore down the treacherous mountain paths. He wasn't looking for trouble, but he'd never been able to walk away from someone in need, and this woman kneeling in the street, with her dark hair escaping its pins and her shoulders shaking with silent sobs, clearly needed someone. He pushed off from the wall and crossed the street, his spurs making soft music with each step. When he reached Helena, he crouched down beside her, keeping a respectful distance. "Madam," he said quietly, his voice carrying a hint of Irish lilt inherited from parents he'd never known. "You all right?" Helena looked up, and Brennan found himself staring into the most startling pair of green eyes he'd ever seen. They were rimmed with red from crying, but they held a fierce intelligence and a pain so raw it made his chest ache. "Do I look all right?" she asked, her voice hoarse but steady. She wiped at her face with the back of her hand, leaving a smudge of dirt across her cheek. "I'm sorry. That was rude. You're just trying to help." "No need to apologize," Brennan said, offering his hand to help her up. "I'm Brennan O'Sullivan. I'm new in town, so maybe I'm speaking out of turn, but I heard what your father said, and I heard mention of the Kincaid brothers." Helena accepted his hand and stood, brushing dust from her simple brown skirt. Up close, Brennan could see she was probably in her early 20s, with a face that would have been pretty if it wasn't drawn so tight with worry and exhaustion. "Everyone knows the Kincaids," Helena said bitterly. "Marcus and Joel. They run half this town, and they're working on getting the other half. My name is Helena Crawford, and yes, that drunk who just disowned me is my father." She looked at Brennan with sudden suspicion. "Why do you care?" Brennan straightened, hooking his thumbs in his belt. "Because what he said was wrong, dead wrong, and because I've got a feeling you're about to tell me you don't have anyone else to turn to." "I don't," Helena admitted, something like defiance creeping into her voice despite her circumstances. "But I don't need charity, Mr. O'Sullivan. I've managed on my own this long." "Not charity," Brennan said. "And from what I overheard, Tonight might be a different kind of challenge than you've faced before." Helena's defiance wavered, and fear flickered across her face. "They said they'd burn me out if I didn't sign the deed over. Tonight, after dark." Marcus Kincaid said they were done being patient. Brennan felt anger kindle in his gut. He'd known men like the Kincaids before, men who thought power gave them the right to crush anyone weaker. "Then I'd say you need someone watching your back when the sun goes down. I've got nothing else pressing tonight." "Why would you do that?" Helena asked, searching his face. "You don't know me. You don't owe me anything." "Maybe that's exactly why," Brennan said. "No complications, no history. Just what's right and what's wrong. Your father said you weren't worth fighting for, but I'd say he's wrong about that. In fact, I'd fight the whole damn world to prove him wrong if that's what it takes." Helena stared at him, and for a moment, neither of them spoke. Around them, Jerome continued its busy afternoon, miners coming off shift, ore wagons rattling down the steep streets, the constant percussion of the stamp mills processing copper ore. But in that moment, something passed between them, an understanding or perhaps the beginning of one. "You don't even know me," Helena repeated, but her voice was softer now, wondering. "Then, tell me about yourself on the way to your place," Brennan said. "I'd like to see what I'm defending and figure out the best way to do it. These Kincaid brothers, they likely to come alone or bring help?" "They'll bring help," Helena said. "They always do, usually 3 or 4 other men from their smelting operation." Brennan nodded slowly. "Then we'd better get prepared. You know how to shoot?" "I can handle a rifle," Helena said. "My mother taught me before she died. We had a place outside town before we moved in, and there were rattlesnakes and coyotes." "Good," Brennan said. "That'll even the odds a bit." They walked together through Jerome's chaotic streets, Helena leading the way toward the eastern edge of town. She told him about her mother, about how Sarah Crawford had been the strong one in the family, the one who'd held everything together. She explained how her father had fallen apart after the consumption took his wife, drowning himself in whiskey and gambling away what little money they'd had. "The land was in my mother's name," Helena explained as they climbed a steep path that led away from the main cluster of buildings. "She inherited it from her brother. When she died, it came to me. It's not much, but it's mine. And I'll be damned if I'll let the Kincaids take it just because they're stronger and meaner." Brennan found himself admiring her spirit even as he worried about what the night would bring. When they reached her cabin, he understood better why the Kincaids wanted this particular piece of ground. It sat on a relatively flat section of the mountainside, with a clear spring bubbling up from the rocks behind it. Water was valuable in this high desert country, and a smelting operation would need a reliable source. The cabin was small but well-maintained, with a covered porch and shutters on the windows. Helena had obviously been taking care of it despite her circumstances. "It's nice," Brennan said, meaning it. "Your mother had good taste." "She did," Helena agreed, and he heard the grief still fresh in her voice. She unlocked the door and invited him inside. The interior was simple but clean, with a wood stove, a table with 2 chairs, a narrow bed in one corner, and shelves lined with books. Brennan was surprised by the books until he remembered that Jerome, for all its rough edges, had a school and even a small library. "You like to read," he observed. "It's how I've survived," Helena said. "When everything else was falling apart, I could disappear into stories. Probably sounds foolish to a practical man like yourself." "Not foolish at all," Brennan said. "Everyone needs an escape sometimes. Mine was always horses. Give me a difficult animal to gentle and I could forget everything else." Helena looked at him with new interest. "You're a horseman?" "Was," Brennan said. "Cowboy down south until the drought killed the ranch. Now, I'm figuring out what comes next." They spent the next hour preparing for the night's confrontation. Brennan checked all the approaches to the cabin, noting the sight lines and the places where attackers might try to get close. Helena brought out her rifle, a Winchester that had seen better days but was clean and well-maintained. Brennan had his own rifle and his Colt revolver, both of which he'd kept in good condition through years of hard use. As the sun began its descent toward the western horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple that would have been beautiful under different circumstances, they settled in to wait. Brennan positioned himself on the porch where he could watch the main approach, while Helena took up a position inside near one of the windows. "Tell me something," Helena said through the open door as the light faded. Why did you really stop to help me? The truth this time." Brennan was quiet for a moment, watching the shadows lengthen across the scrubby landscape. "Because I know what it's like to be alone," he said finally. "My parents died when I was young, some kind of fever. I grew up in an orphanage in Prescott until I was old enough to work. 14 years old, they sent me to a ranch, and I learned everything I know from cowboys who didn't have to be kind but were anyway. One of them, old man named Samuel, he told me something I never forgot. He said the measure of a man isn't what he can take, but what he's willing to give when he doesn't have to. So, when I saw you in that street, heard your father's words, I thought about Samuel and what he'd have done." Helena was quiet, absorbing this. "Samuel sounds like he was a good man." "The best," Brennan agreed. "Died 3 years back. Got kicked by a horse he was trying to doctor. Went quick, at least." "I'm sorry," Helena said, and Brennan could hear she meant it. "We all lose people," Brennan said. "Question is what we do after." Darkness fell fully over Jerome, and with it came the sound of approaching horses. Brennan counted at least 5 riders from the sound, maybe 6. He stood up slowly, rifle ready but not raised, not yet. He didn't want to start shooting unless he had to. The riders emerged from the gloom, and Brennan could make out their shapes in the moonlight that was just beginning to rise. 2 men rode at the front, bigger than the others, with the confidence of men used to getting their way. The Kincaid brothers, Brennan assumed. "Helena Crawford," one of them called out, his voice carrying the particular arrogance of assumed authority. "You've had your time to think it over. We've come for your answer, and it better be the right one." Brennan stepped forward to the edge of the porch, making himself visible. "She already gave you her answer," he said, his voice calm but carrying easily across the distance. "The lady said no. Time for you gentlemen to respect that and move along." There was a moment of surprised silence, and then harsh laughter from the riders. "Who the hell are you?" the same voice demanded. "This isn't your business, stranger." "I'm making it my business," Brennan said. "Name's Brennan O'Sullivan, and I'm standing here telling you that Miss Crawford's property is not for sale. Not tonight, not tomorrow, not ever unless she decides otherwise of her own free will." The lead rider, who Brennan now assumed was Marcus Kincaid, edged his horse forward. He was a big man, thick through the shoulders, with a face that suggested he'd broken more than a few noses in his time, some of them probably his own. "One man," Marcus said, and there was amusement in his voice. "You think one cowboy can stop 6 of us? You're either brave or stupid, and I'm betting on stupid." "Could be both," Brennan said easily. "But here's what I know. You boys start something here tonight. People are going to hear about it. This isn't some remote canyon where you can do whatever you want. This is the edge of town, and gunfire carries. The marshal is going to come asking questions, and even if you own half of Jerome, you don't own him. So maybe you should consider whether this piece of land is worth that kind of trouble." "The marshal doesn't care what happens to a drunk's daughter," Marcus sneered. "Everyone knows Tom Crawford's worthless, and everyone knows his girl isn't far behind." That's when Helena spoke up from inside the cabin, her voice ringing clear. "You're right about one thing, Marcus. My father is worthless, at least right now. But you're dead wrong about me. I'm worth 10 of you, and this land is worth defending. Mr. O'Sullivan here has agreed to help me do just that. So you've got a choice. You can turn around and ride away, or you can try to take this property by force and see how that works out for you." There was steel in her voice, and Brennan felt a surge of respect for this woman who'd been so broken just hours before, but was now standing her ground. Marcus Kincaid's amusement faded. "Last chance, Helena. Sign the deed, take the money we're offering, and walk away clean. Otherwise, things are going to get ugly." "I don't think so," came a new voice from the darkness off to the left. "In fact, I think you boys are the ones who should be leaving." Brennan recognized the voice and felt relief wash through him. During the afternoon, while Helena had been gathering supplies from inside, he had made a quick trip to the marshal's office. Marshal Edwin Reeves was a straight shooter, literally and figuratively, and he'd listened to Brennan's concerns about what might happen come nightfall. Apparently, he'd decided to position himself where he could witness events firsthand. The marshal stepped into view, his badge catching the moonlight, his own rifle held ready. He was an older man, maybe 50, with gray in his beard and the kind of weathered face that suggested he'd been enforcing law on the frontier for a long time. "Marcus, Joel," the marshal said, his voice tired but firm. "You boys want to conduct business. You do it in the daylight through proper channels. You want to intimidate a woman on her own property with 6 armed men after dark. That's another matter entirely. That's something I can arrest you for. We weren't going to hurt anyone, Joel Kincaid spoke up for the first time, and Brennan could hear he was the younger brother, less sure of himself. We just wanted to talk. 6 men don't ride out for talking, Marshal Reeves said. And I heard Marcus here making threats, so let's not pretend this was a social visit. Now, I'm going to suggest you all turn those horses around and head back to town. Come morning, if you want to make Miss Crawford a legitimate offer for her property through a lawyer, that's your business. But tonight is over. There was tension in the air, the kind that could snap into violence with very little provocation. Brennan kept his rifle ready, watching the other men carefully. He could see the calculations going on behind Marcus Kincaid's eyes, weighing whether the potential reward was worth the certain trouble. Finally, Marcus jerked his horse's reins, turning the animal. "This isn't finished," he said, but the heat had gone out of his voice. "Not by a long shot. Maybe it is, maybe it isn't," Marshal Reeves said. "But it's finished for tonight, and that's what matters. Get going." The 6 riders withdrew into the darkness, the sound of their horses' hooves fading gradually. Brennan didn't relax until they were completely gone, and even then, he kept his attention sharp. Marshal Reeves walked up to the cabin, shaking his head. "Well, Mr. O'Sullivan, I appreciate you coming to find me this afternoon. Glad I decided to take your concerns seriously." "Thank you, Marshal," Brennan said. "I wasn't sure you would." "I've been watching the Kincaids for a while now," Reeves admitted. "They've been pushing hard, buying up property, squeezing people. Haven't been able to catch them doing anything overtly illegal, but I've had my suspicions. Tonight confirms them." Helena emerged from the cabin, still holding her rifle. "Marshal Reeves, I appreciate your help. I really do. But they'll be back, won't they?" The marshal's expression was sympathetic, but honest. "Probably. Men like that don't give up easy, especially when there's profit involved. You might want to consider their offer, Helena. I know this land means something to you, but is it worth your life?" "Yes," Helena said simply. "It's all I have left of my mother. It's the only thing that's truly mine. I won't be bullied into giving it up." Marshal Reeves sighed. "I respect that, I do. But I can't station myself here every night, and I can't guarantee they won't try something different next time. You might want to think about getting some permanent help, someone who can be here when they come back." He tipped his hat to both of them and walked off into the darkness, leaving Brennan and Helena alone under the rising moon. "He's right," Brennan said after a moment. "They'll try again." Helena turned to look at him, and in the moonlight, her face was pale but determined. "I can't afford to hire protection, Mr. O'Sullivan. I barely have enough to feed myself, so I appreciate what you did tonight, truly, but I understand if you need to move on. You've done more than anyone else would have." Brennan considered his options. He'd been planning to look for work in the mines, maybe guarding payroll shipments like he'd originally thought. But something about this woman and her situation had gotten under his skin. Maybe it was the injustice of it, or maybe it was something else, something he wasn't quite ready to name. "What if I stayed?" he asked. "Not for money, just for a while, until we figure out a more permanent solution. I could camp out here, keep an eye on things." Helena shook her head. "I can't ask you to do that. You have your own life to live." "You didn't ask," Brennan pointed out. "I'm offering. And as for my own life, well, it's pretty unattached at the moment. I've got no obligations, no one waiting for me anywhere. Might as well spend my time doing something useful." "But why?" Helena asked, and there was genuine confusion in her voice. "You don't even know me. We just met today." Brennan smiled, though she probably couldn't see it well in the darkness. "You know, you keep asking me that. Maybe I'm just contrary enough that when your father said you weren't worth fighting for, I decided to prove him wrong. Or maybe I see something in you that reminds me that not everything in this world is about profit and power. Some things are worth protecting just because they're worth protecting." Helena was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke again, her voice was thick with emotion. "I don't know what to say." "Say yes," Brennan suggested. "Say yes, Brennan, you can camp out on my porch for a while, and we'll figure this out together. Say yes, and then maybe make some coffee because it's going to be a long night, and I could use something hot to drink." Despite everything, Helena laughed, and the sound was like something breaking free. "Yes," she said. "Yes to all of that. Come inside, and I'll make coffee." They spent the rest of that night talking, really talking, the way two people do when circumstances throw them together, and there's nothing else to do but get to know each other. Brennan learned that Helena had taught herself to read beyond what the schoolteacher had shown her, that she dreamed of maybe one day opening a small lending library in Jerome for the children whose parents couldn't afford books. She told him about her mother's herb garden, how Sarah Crawford had known all the plants that grew in the high desert and had taught Helena their names and uses. Brennan shared stories of his life on the cattle drives, the long days in the saddle, and the longer nights under stars so thick they seemed close enough to touch. He told her about a horse he'd gentled once, a mare so wild the ranch owner had wanted to shoot her, how Brennan had spent 3 months earning her trust until she'd become the best cutting horse on the ranch. "You love it," Helena observed. "Cowboying, I mean. You can hear it in your voice when you talk about it." "I do," Brennan admitted. "Or I did. Hard to say now that it's behind me. Drought took everything south of here. Ranches folding left and right, cattle dying in the fields. I figured it was time to try something different, but I haven't quite figured out what that something is yet." "Maybe it's this," Helena said softly. "Maybe it's helping people who need it." "Maybe," Brennan agreed, though he wasn't sure if that was sustainable as a way of life. As dawn began to break over the mountains to the east, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold, Brennan stepped out onto the porch and surveyed the landscape. From up here, he could see a good portion of Jerome spread out below, the buildings stacked precariously on the mountainside, smoke beginning to rise from chimneys as the town woke up. It was a beautiful view, and he understood better why Helena's mother had chosen this spot. Helena joined him on the porch, carrying 2 fresh cups of coffee. She'd changed into a clean dress, dark blue with small white flowers, and had done something with her hair so that it was neatly pinned up. In the morning light, Brennan could see that she was indeed pretty, with delicate features and those remarkable green eyes. "Thank you," she said, handing him the coffee. "For everything, for stopping when you didn't have to, for staying through the night, for making me feel like maybe I'm not as alone as I thought I was." "You're not alone," Brennan said, and he meant it. Something had shifted during the long night of conversation. Some connection had formed that he didn't fully understand but couldn't deny. "We'll figure this out, Helena. The Kincaids, your situation, all of it. I meant what I said. I'll fight the whole world if that's what it takes to prove you're worth defending." Helena looked up at him, and her eyes were bright with unshed tears. "I'm starting to believe you might actually mean that." "I do," Brennan said simply, and he realized it was true. In less than 24 hours, this woman and her struggle had become important to him in a way he couldn't quite explain. Maybe it was just his natural inclination to help the underdog, or maybe it was something more. Either way, he was committed now. Over the next few days, they fell into a routine. Brennan spent his mornings helping Helena with chores around the property, repairing a section of fence that had come loose, fixing a leak in the cabin's roof, chopping wood for the stove. In the afternoons, he'd ride into town on the horse he'd stabled at the livery, keeping his ears open for any talk about the Kincaids' next move. What he learned wasn't encouraging. Marcus and Joel Kincaid were indeed powerful men in Jerome, with their fingers in multiple businesses beyond the smelting operation. They owned part of the stamp mill, had interests in several of the larger mines, and controlled much of the freight service that brought supplies up the mountain and took ore down. Crossing them was generally considered a bad idea, but Brennan also learned that not everyone in Jerome was happy about the Kincaids' dominance. There were others who'd been pressured to sell property or businesses, who'd seen the brothers use intimidation and occasionally violence to get what they wanted. The problem was that no one wanted to stand up to them, not when doing so could mean losing your livelihood or worse. On the 4th day after the confrontation at Helena's cabin, Brennan was in the general store buying supplies when he overheard a conversation that made his blood run cold. "Heard Marcus hired those men from Prescott," one miner was saying to another, "the ones who handle problems that regular folks can't solve." "You mean gunmen," the second miner said flatly. "He hired killers." "I didn't say that," the first man said nervously. "Just repeating what I heard. Something about taking care of that situation on the eastern edge of town, making sure it gets resolved permanent-like." Brennan finished his purchases quickly and headed straight back to Helena's cabin. He found her in the garden behind the house, tending to the herbs her mother had planted. She looked up when she heard him approaching, and her smile faded when she saw his expression. "What's wrong?" she asked, standing up and brushing dirt from her hands. Brennan told her what he'd overheard, watching her face pale as she absorbed the implications. "Gunmen," she said quietly. "They're hiring killers." "That's what it sounds like," Brennan said. "Helena, I think it's time to consider your options seriously. Maybe the marshal can help, or maybe there's somewhere else you could go for a while, somewhere safe." But Helena was shaking her head before he finished speaking. "No, I won't run, and I won't give up. This is my land, my home. If they want it, they'll have to take it over my dead body." "That's what I'm afraid of," Brennan said grimly. "Professional gunmen don't come to talk. They come to do a job." Helena met his eyes, and he saw determination there, but also fear. "Then what do? We get smart," Brennan said, "and we get help. I'm good in a fight, but I can't take on multiple experienced gunmen alone. Not and keep you safe at the same time. We need allies." "Who would help us?" Helena asked. "You heard what people say about the Kincaids. Everyone's too afraid." Brennan thought about this. "What about the other people they've pushed around? The ones who've lost property or been intimidated? If we could get them to stand together, there'd be strength in numbers." "Maybe," Helena said doubtfully. "But getting people to actually stand up is different from getting them to complain quietly to each other." She was right, but Brennan didn't have a better idea. They spent the rest of the day trying to come up with a plan, and by evening they had decided to approach some of the people Brennan had heard about, the ones who'd had their own troubles with the Kincaids. The next morning, they rode into town together, Helena on a gentle mare she kept in a small corral behind her cabin. They started with Abraham Hutchins, who'd owned a freight company until the Kincaids had systematically undercut his prices and stolen his clients. He listened to their pitch, nodding sympathetically, but ultimately shook his head. "I appreciate what you're trying to do," Abraham said, "but I've got a wife and 3 children to think about. I can't risk crossing the Kincaids again. They've already ruined me once. I won't give them a chance to do worse." They had similar conversations with 4 other people, and all of them ended the same way. Sympathy, understanding, but ultimately fear. No one was willing to stand up. By afternoon, Helena and Brennan were sitting in the small restaurant near the center of town, eating a lunch neither of them had much appetite for. "It was a good idea," Helena said quietly. "It just didn't work." Brennan stared at his plate, frustration building in his chest. He'd been so sure that if people just banded together, they could stand up to the Kincaids. But fear was a powerful motivator, and these people had families to protect, livelihoods to preserve. "There has to be another way," he muttered. That's when a shadow fell across their table, and Brennan looked up to find Marshal Reeves standing there, his expression grave. "Mr. O'Sullivan, Miss Crawford, might I have a word with you both outside?" They followed the marshal out into the street, where he led them a little away from the crowds. "I'm going to be straight with you," Reeves said without preamble. "I've heard Marcus Kincaid has brought in outside help to deal with your situation. Professional help, if you take my meaning. Now, legally, I can't do anything until a crime is actually committed. But I wanted to warn you both. Whatever you're planning, whatever you think you can do to defend that property, it might not be enough. These men are experienced killers, and they don't have any conscience about their work. So what are you suggesting?" Brennan asked. "That Helena should just give up her land?" "I'm suggesting that being alive is better than being dead," Reeves said bluntly. "And I'm suggesting that sometimes you have to lose a battle to survive for another fight. Miss Crawford, your mother would want you safe, not dead over a piece of land." Helena's jaw tightened. "You don't know what my mother would want." "Maybe not," the marshal conceded, "but I know she wouldn't want you 6 feet under, and that's where you're headed if you stay on this path." After the marshal left, Helena and Brennan stood in silence for a long moment. Around them, Jerome bustled with afternoon activity, oblivious to the drama playing out. "He's right, you know," Brennan said finally. "About being alive, being better than being dead." Helena turned to him, and there was fire in her eyes. "Don't you dare back out on me now, Brennan O'Sullivan. Don't you dare. You said you'd fight the world to prove I was worth defending. Was that just talk?" "It wasn't just talk," Brennan said, meeting her gaze steadily. "But I also don't want to watch you die defending a piece of land, no matter how much it means to you." "It's not just about the land anymore," Helena said, her voice rising. "Don't you see that? It's about whether we let men like the Kincaids take whatever they want just because they have power. It's about standing up even when it's hard, especially when it's hard. You taught me that, with everything you've done this past week." Brennan felt something shift inside him at her words. She was right. This had become about more than just her property. It had become about principle, about refusing to let bullies win simply because they were willing to use violence. "All right," he said. "Then we dig in and we fight, but we do it smart. We prepare, we plan, and we don't take any unnecessary risks." Helena nodded, some of the tension leaving her shoulders. "Agreed, so what do we do?" They spent the rest of the afternoon purchasing supplies, things that might help them defend the cabin if it came to that. Extra ammunition, materials to reinforce the shutters, supplies for a longer siege if necessary. Brennan also bought himself some time at the telegraph office, sending a wire to an old friend from his cowboying days who'd become a lawman down in Tucson. It was a long shot, but maybe there was some legal angle they hadn't considered. As they rode back up to Helena's cabin in the late afternoon, the sun slanting golden across the mountainside, Brennan found himself watching her. Over the past few days, he'd seen her strength, her determination, her intelligence, but he'd also seen her kindness, the way she'd insisted on feeding him proper meals, the way she'd asked about his life with genuine interest. She'd become important to him, and the thought of anything happening to her made his chest tight with a feeling he wasn't ready to examine too closely. That evening, as they worked together to reinforce the cabin's defenses, Helena suddenly stopped what she was doing and looked at him. "Can I ask you something personal?" she said. "Sure," Brennan replied, hammering a board into place over one of the windows. "Why haven't you ever settled down? You're what, 27, 28? Most men your age are married with families." Brennan set down his hammer and wiped sweat from his forehead. 27, he confirmed. "And I guess I just never found the right person, or the right time. Life on a cattle ranch doesn't leave much opportunity for courting, and the women I met, well, they wanted things I couldn't give them. Stability. A home that wasn't just a bunkhouse. A future that was more certain than another season following cows across empty land." "Do you want those things?" Helena asked. "Stability, a home, a future?" Brennan looked at her, really looked at her, and felt something profound shift inside him. "I'm starting to think I might," he said quietly. "I'm starting to think maybe I've just been waiting for the right reason to want them." The air between them suddenly felt charged, heavy with something unspoken. Helena opened her mouth to respond, but before she could speak, they both heard it. The sound of approaching horses. Brennan grabbed his rifle immediately, positioning himself where he could see the main approach. But as the riders came into view, he relaxed slightly. It wasn't the Kincaids or their hired guns. It was a single rider, older, dressed in dark clothes with a clerical collar visible in the fading light. "Father Morrison," Helena said, surprise evident in her voice. She opened the door and stepped out onto the porch. "What brings you out here?" The priest dismounted slowly, moving with the stiffness of someone not entirely comfortable on horseback. He was perhaps 60, with white hair and kind eyes set in a weathered face. "Miss Crawford," he said, removing his hat. "I heard about your troubles, and I wanted to come speak with you before things went any further. If you're here to convince me to give up my land, you can save your breath," Helena said, but there was no hostility in her voice. Clearly she knew and respected the priest. "I'm not here for that," Father Morrison said, "though I won't lie and say I don't worry for your safety. No, I came because I've been speaking with some of the people in town, and I believe I may have found a solution to your problem, or at least a partial one." Brennan and Helena exchanged glances. "What kind of solution?" Brennan asked. Father Morrison looked between them. "The church has some influence in Jerome, more than you might think. I've spoken with the bishop in Prescott, and we're prepared to make a public statement supporting Miss Crawford's right to her property. More than that, we're prepared to purchase a portion of the water rights from the spring on this land, which would give the church a legal stake in what happens here. The Kincaids might be willing to intimidate or harm a lone woman, but they'll think twice about crossing the Catholic Church openly." Helena's eyes widened. "Father, I don't know what to say. That's incredibly generous, but I can't accept charity." "It's not charity," the priest said firmly. "We need water for the new hospital we're planning to build. Your spring is well positioned, and the water rights would be legitimately valuable to us. We'd pay you fair market price, which would also give you some financial breathing room. And with the church as a partial stakeholder in the property, you'd have powerful protection. Brennan felt hope kindle for the first time in days. Would the Kincaids really back off because of church involvement? Marcus Kincaid's mother is a devout Catholic, Father Morrison said. She attends Mass every Sunday without fail, and she has significant influence over her sons, more than most people realize. If I let it be known that the church views any action against this property as action against the church itself, I believe Marcus will back down. He's ruthless in business, but he won't risk his immortal soul or his mother's wrath. Helena looked like she might cry. I don't understand. Why would you do this for me? We've barely spoken since my mother's funeral. Father Morrison's expression softened. Your mother was a good woman, Helena, and she helped a great many people in this town with her knowledge of healing herbs and her generous spirit. This is a way of honoring her memory, and beyond that, it's simply the right thing to do. The church should stand against injustice, and what the Kincaids are attempting here is certainly unjust. They talked for another hour, working out the details. The church would purchase a 20-year lease on half the water rights from Helena's spring for a sum that would give her enough money to make some improvements to her property and support herself for several months. More importantly, the arrangement would be legally binding and publicly announced, making it clear that any interference with the property would affect the church's interests. After Father Morrison left, promising to have the papers drawn up by a lawyer within 2 days, Helena and Brennan stood on the porch in the gathering darkness, both of them almost afraid to believe their luck. It's going to work, Helena said wonderingly. It's actually going to work. I'll be able to keep the land and I'll be safe. Looks that way, Brennan agreed, and he should have felt nothing but relief. He did feel relief, but there was something else mixed in, something that felt uncomfortably like disappointment. With Helena's problem solved, there was no reason for him to stay. She wouldn't need his protection anymore, and he'd be free to move on, find work, continue with his life. The realization that he didn't want to move on hit him with unexpected force. Helena must have seen something in his expression because she turned to face him fully. What's wrong? This is good news. It is, Brennan said. It's great news. I'm glad you'll be safe. But, Helena prompted. Brennan struggled to find the right words. But I guess I'm realizing that I've gotten used to being here, to helping you, to our conversations in the evening and working together during the day. I'm going to miss it when I leave. Who says you have to leave? Helena asked softly. Brennan looked at her, his heart suddenly pounding. Helena, I can't just stay here indefinitely. You don't need protection anymore, and I need to find work, make a living somehow. What if I said I wanted you to stay anyway? Helena asked, taking a step closer to him. Not for protection, but because I've gotten used to having you here too. Because over this past week, you've become important to me in a way I wasn't expecting. Because when I think about you leaving, it makes me feel like I'm about to lose something precious. Brennan reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wanted to, and cupped her face gently in his hand. Helena, I need to know that you mean that. I need to know this isn't just gratitude talking or the stress of everything you've been through. It's not, Helena said, leaning into his touch. I know the difference between gratitude and this. What I feel when I look at you, when we talk, when we work together, that's not gratitude. That's something much deeper, something I've never felt before. I feel it too, Brennan admitted. I have since almost the first day. You're brave and strong and beautiful, and when your father said you weren't worth fighting for, all I could think was that he was the biggest fool I'd ever encountered. Because you're worth fighting for, Helena Crawford. You're worth everything. She kissed him then, rising up on her toes to press her lips to his, and Brennan felt something inside him come home. He wrapped his arms around her and kissed her back, pouring into it all the feelings he'd been holding back, all the things he hadn't let himself acknowledge. When they finally broke apart, both of them breathing hard, Helena smiled up at him. So you'll stay? I'll stay, Brennan promised. For as long as you'll have me. We'll figure out the details, find some way for me to make a living. But yes, I'll stay. They spent that night talking again, but this time it was different. This time they were talking about a future together, making plans, dreaming dreams that involved both of them. Brennan told her about his idea of maybe starting a small horse training operation, something he could do here on her property if she'd allow it. Helena talked about her lending library dream, about how, maybe with the money from the church's water rights purchase, she could start small, maybe converting part of the cabin into a space where children could come borrow books. 2 days later, as promised, Father Morrison returned with a lawyer and the papers for Helena to sign. Marcus Kincaid showed up during the signing, his face thunderous, but he didn't cause trouble. He stood back and watched, and when it was done, he caught Brennan's eye. "You're making an enemy," Marcus said quietly. "You know that, don't you?" "I'm fine with that," Brennan replied calmly. "Long as Miss Crawford is safe, I can handle having enemies." Marcus's expression was cold. "She's got the church protecting her now, but you don't. You might want to watch your back, cowboy." "I always do," Brennan said, "but I appreciate the warning." After Marcus left, Brennan felt Helena's hand slip into his. "He's not going to let this go," she said quietly. "Maybe not," Brennan agreed. "But he's not going to win either. We'll be careful, and we'll be smart, and we'll build something here that's bigger than his anger and his greed." Over the following weeks, that's exactly what they did. Brennan found work breaking horses for several of the mining operations, which needed steady mounts for their supervisors and scouts. The pay was decent, and it was work he was good at, work he enjoyed. He built a small corral and training pen on Helena's property, with her blessing, and word spread quickly that there was a talented horseman available in Jerome. Helena, meanwhile, used part of the money from the church to purchase books, dozens of them, from merchants in Prescott, and even as far away as Tucson. She set up a lending system in her cabin, and children began coming several times a week to borrow books and return them. Some of the adults started coming too, miners who wanted to improve their reading or just escape into stories after long days underground. As summer turned to fall in 1883, Brennan and Helena fell into a life together that felt natural and right. They weren't married yet. Propriety still demanded that Brennan sleep in the small addition he'd built onto the side of the cabin, but everyone in Jerome knew they were courting, and no one seemed scandalized by it. One evening in late October, as they sat on the porch watching the sun set over the distant mountains, Helena said something that had clearly been on her mind. "My father came by today while you were in town, working with that bay gelding." Brennan turned to look at her, alert to the tension in her voice. "What did he want?" "To apologize," Helena said, and there was wonder in her voice. "He's been sober for 3 weeks now, he says. Joined a temperance group Father Morrison started. He wanted to apologize for what he said that day, for abandoning me, for being a terrible father since Mother died." "What did you say?" Brennan asked. "I said I appreciated the apology, but that forgiveness would take time," Helena said. "I'm not ready to just forget everything that happened, but I'm willing to see if he can stay sober, if he can become someone worth having a relationship with again." "That's fair," Brennan said. "More than fair, actually. You're a better person than me. I'm not sure I could be that generous." Helena smiled. "You? You're the most generous person I know. You stopped to help a stranger in the street and ended up changing her entire life. If that's not generous, I don't know what is." Brennan took her hand, threading his fingers through hers. "You changed my life too, you know. Before I met you, I was just drifting, no purpose, no direction. You gave me a reason to stay in one place, to build something, instead of just wandering." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the stars begin to appear in the darkening sky. Finally, Brennan took a deep breath and said what had been on his mind for weeks. "Helena, I know we haven't known each other very long, just a few months really. But I also know what I feel, and I know it's real. I love you. I'm in love with you, and I can't imagine my life without you in it anymore." Helena turned to him, her eyes shining. "I love you too, Brennan. I think I started falling in love with you that first day when you looked at me in the street and saw someone worth defending, instead of someone worthless like my father said." "Then marry me," Brennan said. "I don't have much to offer except myself and whatever future we can build together, but I promise I'll spend every day trying to make you happy, trying to be worthy of your love." "Yes," Helena said, laughing and crying at the same time. "Yes, of course, yes. I don't need you to have anything except yourself. That's more than enough." They were married in early December by Father Morrison in the small Catholic church that perched on one of Jerome's terraced streets. It was a simple ceremony, but well attended. Many of the people from town came, including some who'd been too afraid to stand up to the Kincaids, but who respected what Helena and Brennan had accomplished. Marshall Reeves was there, and even Abraham Hutchins, the former freight company owner, showed up with his family. Surprisingly, Thomas Crawford came too, sober and clean, wearing a suit that looked like he'd borrowed it for the occasion. He didn't speak to Helena before the ceremony, seeming to understand that his presence was already more than he had any right to expect. But afterward, when Helena was greeting guests, he approached her hesitantly. "You look beautiful," he said quietly. "Your mother would have been so proud of the woman you've become." Helena's eyes filled with tears, but she nodded. "Thank you for coming, Father. It means something that you're here." "I know I can't make up for the past," Thomas said, "but I'm trying to do better. I want to be someone you can be proud of again, even if it takes the rest of my life." "I'd like that," Helena said, and she reached out to squeeze his hand briefly before moving on to greet other guests. The Kincaid brothers did not attend, which surprised no one, but they also didn't cause any trouble. The word around town was that Marcus's mother had indeed been outraged when she learned what her sons had attempted, and she'd made her displeasure known in no uncertain terms. Whether it was her influence, the church's protection, or simply that they'd decided Helena's property wasn't worth the continued trouble, the Kincaids left her alone from that point forward. Brennan and Helena settled into married life with an ease that surprised them both. The little cabin felt like home now, expanded with the addition Brennan had built and furnished gradually with pieces they made or purchased together. The lending library continued to grow, and Helena's reputation as someone who cared about education and literacy spread throughout the mining district. She even started teaching some of the miners' children to read in the evenings, holding informal classes in the cabin. Brennan's horse training business thrived as well. He had a gift for working with difficult animals, a patience and intuition that resulted in horses who were reliable and well-mannered. He hired a young man named Peter to help him, a 19-year-old who'd come to Jerome looking for work and had a natural way with horses. In the spring of 1884, Helena discovered she was pregnant. She told Brennan one evening after dinner, her voice trembling with excitement and nervousness. "Are you sure?" Brennan asked, his hand going automatically to her still flat stomach. "The doctor confirmed it this morning," Helena said. "We're going to have a baby, Brennan, in about 6 months." Brennan pulled her into his arms, overwhelmed by emotion. A baby, a family of his own. Things he'd never let himself hope for were now becoming real. "I'm going to be a father," he said wonderingly. "I have no idea how to be a father." "We'll figure it out together," Helena said, laughing. "Just like we've figured out everything else." The pregnancy progressed smoothly through the summer. Brennan became almost comically protective, worried about Helena doing too much, carrying too much, working too hard. She tolerated his hovering with good humor, pointing out that women had been having babies since the beginning of time, and that she wasn't made of glass. Their son was born in October 1884, during the first cool snap of autumn. The labor was long and difficult, and there were hours when Brennan paced outside the cabin, while the midwife and Father Morrison's housekeeper tended to Helena. He'd faced down potential gunmen without flinching, but the sounds of his wife in pain nearly unmanned him. When it was finally over and he was allowed inside, he found Helena exhausted but glowing, holding a tiny bundle wrapped in blankets. "Meet Benjamin," she said softly. "Benjamin Thomas O'Sullivan." Brennan knelt beside the bed, looking down at the impossibly small face of his son. Benjamin had a shock of dark hair and his mother's delicate features. As Brennan watched, the baby opened his eyes, revealing blue that would probably change color as he got older. "Hey there, little man," Brennan whispered, reaching out to touch one tiny fist. Benjamin's hand opened and then closed around Brennan's finger, gripping with surprising strength. "I'm your father, and I promise you right now, you'll never doubt that you're worth fighting for. You and your mother are my whole world." Helena smiled, tears streaming down her face. "He's perfect." "He is," Brennan agreed, "just like his mother." The years that followed were full and rich. Benjamin grew into a sturdy, curious toddler who loved following his father around the corrals, watching the horses with wide eyes. Helena's lending library expanded to the point where they had to build a separate small structure to house all the books, and she began teaching regular classes for both children and adults who wanted to improve their literacy. In 1886, they had a daughter, Sarah, named after Helena's mother. Sarah had her father's dark eyes and her mother's determination, and from the moment she could walk, she was getting into everything, exploring her world with fearless abandon. Thomas Crawford remained sober and slowly rebuilt his relationship with his daughter and grandchildren. He became a regular visitor to the cabin, never overstaying his welcome, but clearly grateful for the chance to be part of their lives. He was good with the children, patient and gentle in a way he'd never been with Helena when she was young, and both Brennan and Helena could see he was genuinely trying to make amends. In 1888, Marcus Kincaid died in a mine accident, killed when a shaft collapsed. His death changed the power dynamics in Jerome significantly. Joel Kincaid, without his older brother's ruthless drive, proved to be a much more reasonable businessman. He actually approached Helena and Brennan one day to apologize for what had happened years earlier. "I'm not asking for forgiveness," Joel said, standing awkwardly in their yard while Benjamin and Sarah played nearby. "I know what we did was wrong, but I wanted you to know that I regret it and that my brother's way of doing business died with him. I'm trying to do things differently." Helena had looked at Brennan, who'd shrugged slightly, leaving the decision to her. She'd turned back to Joel and nodded. "I appreciate you saying that, and I hope you do things differently. Jerome will be better for it." By 1890, Brennan's horse training operation had grown large enough that he employed 3 helpers and had contracts with multiple mining operations throughout the territory. He'd also started breeding horses, crossing sturdy mining stock with some of the refined horses brought in from California, creating animals that were both tough enough for the rough terrain and elegant enough to command good prices. Helena's library had become an unofficial community center, a place where people gathered not just for books, but for conversation and connection. She'd started a women's reading group that met weekly, and the men had formed their own group that met monthly to discuss everything from literature to politics to the future of Arizona Territory. In 1893, they had another child, a boy they named Samuel after the old cowboy who'd been so influential in Brennan's young life. Samuel was quieter than his siblings, more thoughtful, with a gift for numbers that suggested he might be well suited for business or accounting when he grew up. Through all of this, the little cabin that Helena had fought so hard to keep had been expanded and improved until it was a proper house, comfortable and welcoming. The spring still flowed reliably, providing water not just for them, but for the church's hospital, which had been built in town and served the entire mining district. One evening in the fall of 1895, Brennan and Helena sat on their porch, watching their 3 children play in the yard. Benjamin was 11 now, already showing signs of his father's height and his way with horses. Sarah, at 9, was reading everything she could get her hands on, clearly her mother's daughter. Samuel, at 2, was toddling around, getting into mischief with the single-minded determination of a small child. "Do you ever think about that day?" Helena asked, her hand in Brennan's as they rocked slowly in the chairs he'd built for their 5th anniversary. "The day my father said I wasn't worth fighting for?" "Sometimes," Brennan admitted. "Why?" "Because I want to make sure you know how grateful I am," Helena said. "Not just for that day, but for every day since. You could have walked away at any point, but you didn't. You stayed and you fought, and you proved every day that I was worth it." Brennan raised her hand to his lips and kissed it gently. "You were always worth it, Helena. From the very first moment, you were worth fighting for. And I'd do it all again, without hesitation." "I know you would," Helena said softly. "That's why I love you so much." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the sun paint the sky in shades of orange and purple. In the distance, Jerome sprawled across the mountainside, lights beginning to appear as evening fell. The town had grown and changed over the years, but this place, this home they'd built together, remained constant. Benjamin called out something about a bird he'd spotted, and Sarah ran over to investigate. Samuel toddled after his siblings, determined not to be left out. Watching them, Brennan felt a profound sense of contentment, of rightness. This was what he'd been looking for all those years of drifting, even when he hadn't known he was searching for it. A home, a family, a purpose, and all of it had started with a woman kneeling in a dusty street and a decision to prove that she was worth defending. "What are you thinking about?" Helena asked, watching his face. "That your father was wrong about a lot of things," Brennan said. "But he was most wrong when he said you weren't worth fighting for. You're worth everything, Helena. You and our children, this life we've built. It's worth more than all the gold and copper in these mountains." Helena leaned her head on his shoulder. "We built it together," she reminded him. "That's what makes it so precious." As darkness fell fully and the stars began to appear, they called the children inside for dinner, the house filled with noise and laughter, with the clatter of dishes and the competing voices of 3 children all trying to talk at once. After dinner, Helena read to the younger children, while Brennan helped Benjamin with his schoolwork. Later, after the children were in bed, Brennan and Helena stood together in their bedroom, looking out the window at the moonlit landscape. "I had another visit from Father Morrison today," Helena said. "He wanted to talk about expanding the library, maybe making it official somehow, creating a proper public library for Jerome." "That's a big undertaking," Brennan said. "What did you tell him?" "I told him I'd think about it," Helena said. "It would mean a lot more work, probably fundraising, convincing the town council. But it would also mean ensuring that children in Jerome always have access to books, to education, to possibilities beyond just the minds." "You should do it," Brennan said, "if it's what you want. I'll support you however I can." Helena turned to face him, reaching up to cup his face. "How did I get so lucky? To find a man who not only fights for me, but encourages my dreams?" "I'm the lucky one," Brennan said. "I found a woman who saw past a drifting cowboy with no prospects and recognized someone worth building a life with." They kissed, and after 12 years of marriage, the connection between them was as strong as ever, deeper even, enriched by everything they'd been through together. Over the following years, Helena did establish the official Jerome Public Library with support from the church, contributions from miners and businesses, and eventually funding from the territorial government. The library was built in 1897, a beautiful sandstone building near the center of town, and Helena was named its first librarian. She hired 2 assistants and continued teaching literacy classes, expanding her impact beyond what she'd ever imagined possible. Brennan's business continued to thrive as well. By 1900, he was one of the most respected horsemen in Arizona territory, with buyers coming from as far away as New Mexico and California to purchase his animals. He'd trained Benjamin to work with the horses too, and father and son had developed a partnership that was both productive and deeply satisfying. Sarah, at 15, had announced her intention to become a teacher, and she was already helping her mother at the library and assisting with the literacy classes. Samuel, at 9, showed interest in his father's work, but also in the business side of things, keeping meticulous records of transactions and costs in a way that Brennan found both amusing and useful. In 1901, Benjamin met a girl named Rachel Morrison, Father Morrison's niece who'd come from Prescott to teach at the Jerome School. Watching his son fall in love reminded Brennan of his own courtship with Helena, and he made sure to give Benjamin the same advice that old Samuel had given him years ago, that the measure of a man was what he was willing to give when he didn't have to. Benjamin and Rachel were married in 1903, and when they had their first child in 1904, making Brennan and Helena grandparents, the circle felt complete somehow. Thomas Crawford lived to see his great-grandson, passing away peacefully in his sleep, in 1905 at the age of 68. He'd stayed sober for more than 20 years, and while his relationship with Helena never became what it might have been if he'd made better choices earlier, there was peace between them at the end. "He did try," Helena said at the funeral, standing with Brennan in the cemetery that overlooked Jerome. "In his own way, he tried to be better." "He did," Brennan agreed, "and that counts for something." By 1910, Brennan and Helena were in their 50s, their children grown or nearly so. Benjamin was running most of the horse operation now, allowing Brennan to slow down a bit, though he still couldn't stay away from the corrals entirely. Sarah was teaching at the school and engaged to a young lawyer who'd recently opened a practice in Jerome. Samuel, at 17, was already showing a head for business that suggested he'd do well, no matter what path he chose. One evening, as they had done countless times before, Brennan and Helena sat on their porch, watching the sunset. The house had been expanded again over the years, now easily large enough for family gatherings when all the children and the growing number of grandchildren came to visit. "We did all right, didn't we?" Helena said, her hair now threaded with silver, but her green eyes as bright as ever. "Better than all right," Brennan said. "We did something most people never manage. We built a life together based on love and respect and partnership. We raised good children who are making their own way in the world. We contributed something to this community that will last long after we're gone. The library, Helena said with satisfaction. That's my legacy. Books and learning for anyone who wants them. And mine is knowing that I kept my promise, Brennan said. I fought the world to prove your father wrong, and I won. You were worth fighting for, Helena Crawford O'Sullivan. You were worth everything, and I'd do it all again in a heartbeat. Helena leaned against him, and they watched as the sun sank below the distant mountains, painting the sky in glory. Below them, Jerome sparkled with electric lights, a modern town now, connected by telegraph and telephone to the wider world. Arizona had become a territory on its way to statehood, and Jerome was one of its success stories, a mining town that had lasted when so many others had failed. But none of that mattered as much as this. Two people who'd found each other against the odds, who'd built something lasting and true, who'd proven that love and determination could overcome injustice and fear. I love you, Helena said softly. I loved you that first day when you looked at me in the street and saw someone worth defending, and I've loved you every day since. And I love you, Brennan replied. My whole life changed the moment I heard your father's words and decided to prove him wrong. Best decision I ever made. They sat together as darkness fell, as they had done for more than 25 years, and as they would continue to do for many more years to come. The story that had started with a declaration of worthlessness and a cowboy's determination to prove that wrong had become a love story for the ages, a testament to the power of seeing value where others saw none, of fighting for what was right even when it was hard. In the house behind them, the lights were warm and welcoming. In the town below, the library Helena had built stood as a monument to the transformative power of education and opportunity. In the corrals, horses that Brennan had bred and trained carried miners safely through the mountains. And in the lives of their children and grandchildren, the legacy of their love continued, spreading out into the world in ways they could never have imagined that day in August 1883 when they first met. Years later, when Brennan was in his 70s and Helena in her 60s, they would still tell the story to their grandchildren, who would gather around wide-eyed to hear how Grandpa had defended Grandma against bullies, how he'd promised to fight the world to prove she was worth defending. And did you? The grandchildren would ask. Did you have to fight the world? Didn't need to in the end, Brennan would say with a smile, reaching for Helena's hand. Just needed to stand up when it mattered and refuse to back down. Sometimes that's enough. Sometimes just being willing to fight is what makes the difference. Your grandfather taught me something important, Helena would add. He taught me that worth isn't something someone else gets to decide for you. It's something you claim for yourself, with the help of people who see your value even when you can't. He saw my worth when I couldn't, and he helped me fight for it until I could see it too. The grandchildren would nod seriously, absorbing this wisdom, and then they'd run off to play, leaving Brennan and Helena alone again. We've had a good life, Helena would say on one of these occasions, in the year 1920, when they were 74 and 63 respectively. The best life, Brennan would agree. Built it together, one day at a time. And that really was the heart of it. Not the dramatic confrontation with the Kincaids, or the involvement of the church, or any single moment of crisis and resolution. The heart of their story was in the daily choice to love each other, to support each other's dreams, to build something together that was greater than either of them could have built alone. When Brennan O'Sullivan passed away peacefully in his sleep. In 1924, at the age of 78, the funeral procession stretched through the streets of Jerome. The horse training operation he'd built had become one of the most respected in Arizona, now a state for 12 years. The Jerome Public Library, which Helena had founded, was expanding to add a second floor, and the family they'd created together, with children, grandchildren, and even great-grandchildren, was thriving. Helena stood at his graveside, her children around her, and spoke words that would be remembered and repeated for generations. He was a cowboy who stopped to help a stranger, who looked at someone the world had dismissed as worthless and decided to prove the world wrong. He was my husband, my partner, my greatest love, and my best friend. He taught me that worth is something you fight for, something you claim, something you defend with everything you have. And in fighting for me, he showed me how to fight for myself. Helena lived another 6 years, passing away in 1930 at the age of 73. In those final years, she completed her memoirs, a book that would become a treasured part of Arizona's historical record, telling the story of Jerome's early days and of two people who'd built a life together against significant odds. The book's dedication was simple. To Brennan, who fought the world to prove I was worth defending, and in doing so, taught me that love is the greatest fight of all. Their graves in the Jerome Cemetery overlooked the town they had called home for nearly 50 years, side by side as they had been in life. The inscription on the shared headstone read, "Brennan and Helena O'Sullivan. He said he'd fight the world for her. She taught him that together they'd already won." And the legacy of their love continued through their descendants, through the library that still served Jerome's community, through the stories told and retold of a cowboy who saw worth where others saw none, and a woman who learned to claim her own value with the help of someone who loved her. It was a story of the Wild West, but more than that, it was a story of human worth and dignity, of standing up for what's right, of love that transforms not through grand gestures alone, but through daily choice and commitment. It was a story that proved beyond any doubt that Helena Crawford had always been worth fighting for, and that Brennan O'Sullivan's determination to prove that truth had created ripples that extended far beyond their own lives. In the end, that was the real victory. Not defeating the Kincaids or keeping the land, important as those things were, but building a life of meaning and purpose, raising children who carried their values forward, creating something that lasted long after they were gone. They had fought for each other, and in doing so, they had won everything that mattered.